History is not a straight line. It is a series of peaks and cliffs. In the year 1200 before the Common Era, the world was more connected than it had ever been. Gold from Egypt, tin from the north, copper from Cyprus. It was a golden age of trade, bureaucracy, and absolute stability. To the people living in it, this world felt permanent. It was too big to fail. But in the shadows of the royal archives, a scribe named Anu was reading the reports. The trade ships were disappearing. The borders were silent. The supply chains that kept the empire alive were snapping, one by one. And then, the letters began to arrive. Panic-stricken messages from governors on the coast. They didn't describe an army. They described a ghost fleet, thousands of ships with no flags, filled with families, warriors, and fire. They weren't here to trade, and they were here to stay. Within 30 years, every great city of the Mediterranean would be in ashes. The Bronze Age didn't just end, it was erased. But who were they, these people with no flags, no kingdom, no name we can be certain of? Where did they come from? And how did a fleet of wanderers bring down every superpower on Earth at the same time? Anu had that question. So do we. And the answer is more terrifying than any army. The Egyptians called them the Sea Peoples. The Hittites called them the enemy from the sea. The Ugaritic scribes, the last ones, writing their final desperate letters, simply called them the ships. No one agreed on a single name, because no one fully understood what they were looking at. They were not one people. They were many. Egyptian records name at least 9 distinct groups: the Palaces, the Cheka, the Shekelesh, the Dinyan, the Weshesh. Scholars have spent 2 centuries trying to pin them to a homeland. Some point to the collapsing Mycenaean world of Greece, others to Anatolia, to Sicily, to Sardinia. The honest answer is all of the above, and none of them. These were not invaders from a single nation marching under one king. They were a migration, a wave of displaced peoples uprooted by famine, internal collapse, and drought, cascading south and east through the Mediterranean like a slow-motion catastrophe. Refugees who had become raiders, farmers who had become warriors, entire families, children, livestock, household gods, carried on ships or ox carts, looking for land that still had food. Anu had a letter from the governor of Ugarit, a great trading city on the Syrian coast. It read, "The ships of the enemy have come. They have set fire to my towns and done terrible things. All my troops are in the land of the Hittites. My ships are stationed in Lycia. The country is abandoned to its fate." That letter was never answered, because Ugarit was already burning when it was written. Archaeologists found the clay tablets still in the kiln, fired permanently, not deliberately, by the heat of the city's own destruction. The last words of a civilization, baked into permanence by the flames that ended it. What made the Sea Peoples uniquely devastating was not their numbers or their weapons. It was their timing. They did not arrive in a healthy world. They arrived in a world already fracturing from within. The late Bronze Age international system was extraordinarily interdependent. Bronze, the metal that made every weapon, every tool, every hinge and axle of civilization, required 2 ingredients that almost never occurred in the same place: copper and tin. Copper came from Cyprus. Tin came from mines as far away as Afghanistan. And every army, every palace, every ship in the Mediterranean depended on a supply chain that stretched thousands of miles and touched dozens of kingdoms. When that chain broke, when the ships stopped coming, when the tin ran out, when the harvests failed 3 years running, the whole interconnected edifice began to shake. The Sea Peoples did not knock it down. They arrived just as it was already falling, and they pushed. The collapse did not happen all at once. It happened in sequence, a cascade, each falling city destabilizing the next. It began in the Aegean, in the world of Mycenaean Greece. The Mycenaean palaces were not just homes for kings. They were command and control centers, collecting grain, distributing bronze, organizing labor, keeping the whole system humming. When they fell, they took their entire administrative apparatus with them. The Linear B script, the writing system of Mycenaean Greece, vanished so completely that it was not deciphered until 1952. Greece entered a dark age that lasted 400 years, 4 centuries in which literacy itself disappeared from the Greek world. No one wrote down what happened. There was no one left who could write. The Hittite Empire, Anu's empire, the superpower that had fought Egypt to a standstill at Kadesh and written the world's first recorded peace treaty, collapsed with stunning speed. The last Hittite king, Suppiluliuma II, was writing frantic letters about enemy ships destroying his coastal cities. Then the letters simply stop. Hattusa, the capital, the city of 100 temples, the city Anu had served his entire life, was burned to the ground around 1200 BCE and never reoccupied. Archaeologists found grain stored in the palace granaries, still there after 3,000 years. The people left in such haste, or died so suddenly, that they never came back for the food. Egypt survived, barely. Pharaoh Ramesses III met the Sea Peoples at the mouth of the Nile in what he described as the greatest battle in Egyptian history. His temple carvings at Medinet Habu show the sea battle in extraordinary detail. The Sea Peoples' distinctive feathered helmets, their round shields, their ships with bird-headed prows crashing against the Egyptian fleet. He won. But it cost everything. Egypt after Ramesses III was a shell of itself. Broke, exhausted, its empire in Canaan gone, its prestige gutted. It would never again be the dominant power of the ancient world. The Bronze Age system that Egypt had sat atop for 500 years was finished. And Anu, loyal servant of a dead empire, was still in Hattusa, writing in the dark. We do not know Anu's real name. He is every scribe, every bureaucrat, every keeper of records who ever watched the system they served begin to consume itself. But we know what men like him did in those final days, because some of their tablets survive. They kept writing. When the trade routes broke down, they wrote inventories of what remained. When the soldiers deserted, they wrote the names of the ones who stayed. When the grain ran out, they updated the ration lists downward. 10 portions, then 8, then 5. They documented the collapse with the same careful precision they had used to document the prosperity. Because that was their job. Because order, even the recording of disorder, was the only thing they had left. Anu's last tablet, let us imagine it, is not a heroic document. It is an administrative one. A final tally of clay tablets in the archive, filed by subject, in case someone comes later and needs to find them. The work of a man who no longer believes in rescue, but still believes in order. What ended the Bronze Age was not one thing. It was everything at once. Drought that lasted decades, collapsing the agricultural surpluses that fed standing armies. Internal rebellions of the lower classes, the people who had built the palaces and eaten last. The cascading failure of trade networks so interdependent that the loss of one node crashed the entire system. And into that perfect storm, the Sea Peoples, landless and desperate and relentless, pressing in from every coast. The elites, men like Anu, were the last to understand it. They kept expecting the system to recover, because it always had before, that they kept writing letters to kings who were already dead, requesting grain shipments from cities that were already ash. The machinery of civilization ran on inertia long after the fuel was gone. Hattusa was abandoned around 1200 BCE and never rebuilt. The Sea Peoples settled across the Levant. The Palaces became the Philistines of the Bible. The old palace economies never returned. In their place, over centuries, arose something new. Smaller city-states, iron technology, alphabetic writing, merchant republics. The world that replaced the Bronze Age was messier, more decentralized, and ultimately more resilient. It was, in many ways, the world we still live in. But that is not Anu's story. Anu's story ends in a burning city with a stylus in his hand and a tablet not yet dry. A man who understood, in his final hours, that the wall he had trusted his entire life was not a barrier to chaos. It was just clay, and clay, in the end, is only as permanent as the hands that pressed it.